So in that sense, one of the things that we're really focused on is trying to dive in these golden nugget conversations, is diving into the science. Let's explore this idea of, first of all, is what you're doing because somebody else either gave you advice or gave you an idea, or because you've seen them. Is it good advice? Is it good for me advice? And is it potentially something that just worked out for them? All right, welcome to some money therapy. Josh, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. What are we going over today?
Likewise, we're going to kick off something kind of new. Same podcast, and we're still going to focus on teaching the vital signs, but we're going to kind of start doing something very intentional every few episodes or every other episode, as often as we can get the research done and give you guys something great. What we're really focused on in this is kind of exploring what we're calling golden nuggets, right? So I meet people all the time. Josh, I know you do too. We meet people all the time that come to us and say, well, you know, my buddy does this, or a friend of mine who's very successful does this. Or I might ask like, hey, why are you wanting to open up an IRA? Yep. Or why are you participating in your 401k?
And now on social media, you see it a lot. All these experts, you know.
Yeah, and so people, when I ask these questions, they're like, well, because everybody else is doing it, or because, you know, my dad
is successful at it.
Yeah, my dad has given me, you know, I have a lot of admiration for, you know, my family, and they'll come to me sometimes with life advice, right? And it's like, okay, well, I'll do that life advice because I admire you, and you're telling me this is what worked for you, and I want to be like you, and I want the same type of success or opportunity, whatever it might be, right? So in this case, a lot of times I sit with people and I'm like, why are you doing this? And it could be, they could be doing the right thing.
Right.
But I just like to ask the question, why? And then they're just like, well, because everybody else is, or because
my neighbor's doing it.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Like, and sometimes it's exactly what you're supposed to do. But I think when we go through like hard times, just doing something because we feel like we're supposed to do it, or sometimes, especially with generating or building wealth, it takes a long time, and sometimes it's really hard to see the, you know, it's one of those slow plays where the effort now may not be realized for years or decades, right? So in that sense, one of the things that we're really focused on is trying to dive in these golden nugget conversations, is diving into the science. Let's explore this idea of, first of all, is what you're doing because somebody else either gave you advice or gave you an idea, or because you've seen them. Is it good advice? Is it good for me advice? And is it potentially something that just worked out for them? Or maybe they didn't even, there's a great story. It's kind of a funny, I don't know what the word is, just story to prove a life point here. There was this little girl at her great grandmother's house for Christmas, right? They were prepping Christmas dinner, and the mom is in the kitchen with grandma. Great grandma's like sitting there just kind of enjoying the family, and little girl's in the kitchen, and the mom's cutting off the back third of a piece of ham, right? And she takes the back third of the ham and throws it into the dog bowl. And the little girl goes, "Mom, why'd you just cut off a third of the ham?" And she's like, "Well, that's what Grandma always did." And she goes to Grandma. She's like, "Grandma, why'd you always cut off a third of the ham?" She's like, "Well, that's how Great Grandma always cooked her ham." And she went to Great Grandma sitting on the couch. She's like, "Grandma, why'd you always cut off a third of the ham? Isn't that just wasteful?" She's like, "No, honey, at that time in my life, I didn't have a pan big enough for a whole ham." And so here you have generations of wasted ham because
this is how Grandma did it.
This is just how it's been done. So the idea behind these Golden Nugget podcasts are really just to, if you guys have ever seen the show Mythbusters, right? They take these scientific myths, or they ask these questions, and then they try to prove them right or wrong. And I'm not trying to prove anybody wrong, or tell anybody, their way isn't right. I just want to know, is there legitimacy? And I really, at the end of the day, want to give people doing these things confidence that what they're doing or what they're trying or the advice that they're operating from is actually supported in some kind of way, other than just, man, this might have only worked for them.
He was successful at that one time.
They got lucky.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to make sure that we're asking, so how this is coming, where are we getting these gold nuggets from? I think is important. So the first thing that we're doing is we work with people that are in all different phases of life and all different like levels of success, but we typically try to measure financial independence, financial freedom, people that have made work optional in life. They've built some level of success for themselves that they're not, that, to them, maybe even they've made it, right? They're good. And so we've gone to these people that have either had tremendous success early and quick, or we've gone to people that have worked their whole life and they've built something great. And we're going and asking a simple question. What advice would you give your kids, your grandkids, or if you could travel back in time, what advice would you give
yourself
to your to your younger self? And so in that sense, they're coming back with these golden nuggets, and they're good. Like we're spoiled in our job, right? Because I feel like sometimes I'm cheating the system, the game of life, because I get to see all these things that work tremendously for people. Right. And it's a cool job.
Didn't work.
Right. And avoid that. But it's a cool job because I get to give that advice to all kinds of people. And that's what this is. It's giving putting those gold nuggets out there. Some of them are easy to find on Google. Some of them you're seeing on the Instagram stories. Sometimes you just come up on somebody that claims a ton of success and they're like, this is how I did it. Right. So let's explore the science behind it. So again, it's not really about telling anybody they're wrong, because their truth is their truth, and it worked for them. That's great. Yep. It's more about, can we find the science or the mathematical evidence or the investment theory behind it, and then if we can prove that this is good, then we have some
we could be transparent,
and we have some traction to say to this person, hey, not only is that good advice, that's good advice for you right now. Right. Or we could potentially say, hey, that is good advice,
but not
given
quite
time
at this moment for you.
Or it's not the only way. Right. I'm not going to spoil, because I'm already working on kind of something for a future Golden Nuggets episode. But the advice is 100% accurate, but based on kind of some scientific tooling that I'm working on, it's not the only way. And people need to understand, and you guys are going to be listening to that hopefully, and you're going to hear some kind of like, wait, is he telling me, that? And I'm not telling, at the end of the day, one very clear thing that we want to say is, as we put these golden nuggets out there, we still stand by the fact that you need to consult a financial professional.
Yeah, we're not giving advice
before we deploy any specific tactics. But a lot of these are things that everybody, should I participate in my 401k? Should I go Roth if it's an accessible investment tool?
If you're eligible for it.
Right. Or what
do I do if I'm not eligible for it?
Is real estate the right play for me? All these little things come into play. So we're not telling anyone that just because we found science to support the idea that it is right for you. That's a one-on-one conversation either with us or with a financial professional that you work with. But I'm pretty excited about where we're going. So in that sense, first golden nugget and honestly, this is the one that kind of when I was told this, I was like, now this guy is very successful. He's doing very, very well. He's very happy. He's set. It's worked for him, but I wonder how true, like it started. So I was like, you know what?
Or how feasible is it for just anybody else to just jump in and go, all right, this is what he did. I'm going to do exactly what he did.
Right. Well,
and
to be clear, this was he was saying, if I could go back in time and do it differently, I would give myself this advice. So he didn't even follow the golden nugget he's offering.
Yep.
But he has some regret about some past things that he thinks he could be better or have gotten to where he's at sooner.
He felt like he'd be more successful if he would have done that.
Followed this golden nugget. So this was his golden nugget. It kind of got my wheels thinking like, wait a second, does that actually make sense? And then I was like, you know what? I think we have something that could offer a lot of people a lot more confidence in what they are doing. I had a lady come in and she's frustrated with the markets right now, frustrated with account performance in her 401k. She doesn't know why she's giving money to a 401k that's losing value. And she's like, I was like, well, why are you participating in your 401k? Because my parents did. My dad says it's important. And it is. Yeah, I mean, you're getting free money, right? Appreciation over time. Let's not focus on today. But we need to get into the science, because she needs more than I'm only doing it because everyone else says it's important. In trying times, hard times, big life decisions, like there has to be more than just I'm just doing it because.
Yep. Because
right?
Your purpose is what's going to push you through all of that,
and
all
when
the
you,
hard times.
And when you have evidence, you have confidence, right? Trust typically is given at first and then earned over time. And if you start doing something because you're giving trust to a process, but then you hit a 2008 crisis, or you hit a COVID, or you hit 2022,
what we're going through now, yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, well, I gave the trust. It's obviously misguided. I'm out, right? And then financial mistakes are made. Whereas if you understand the process, understand the science and math, then you have more confidence. You're like, oh, I get it. I'm going to stick with it, right? So if you guys have golden nuggets of your own, send them to us. And again, we're not trying to criticize or tell anybody that they're wrong. We're just trying to explore it and put some proof behind the pudding, if you will. That is a saying, right?
Have you given them the golden nugget yet?
No, I haven't. I'm leading them in, man. Creating
just
some
give him the carrot.
Give him the carrot. Okay. All right. So the golden nugget we are going to explore. The statement that was given was, if I could go back in time to my younger self, I would never sell an appreciating asset.
So he was referring to
houses,
real estate, yeah.
But I think,
but you can put that in any.
You can,
appreciating asset.
Old timey cars, stocks, and like watches or family heirlooms that get handed down. Like, is there science to support the idea that we should never sell an appreciating asset?
Yep.
And that's what we're here
and
to explore.
We're not debunking this. We're just saying,
well, we're going to try to explore it, and maybe we do end up debunking it. That will be told over the next, 20 minutes or so. You just have to watch. Maybe we can't. No. So first of all, I think that when we talk about this, one of the first things that I started to think about, I think about a client that I started working with her several years ago, and she had inherited some Coke stock that her mother or father had inherited before her. And the cost basis on this Coca-Cola stock was like single digits.
Right, yeah.
Right? And of course, they've gotten dividends along the way. And I'm like, man, like, okay, there's some truth. Like, if you don't need to sell something and you have an appreciating asset, there could be some truth in this. The problem that I was running into, though, is, well, what about the next opportunity? If I can't sell something to generate the cash to take advantage of the next opportunity, is there a cost of missing?
I was about to say there's opportunity cost of, being diversified.
Yeah. So in that sense, like you got to weigh the opportunity cost versus the cost of selling something that or I shouldn't say it that way, that you have reasonable confidence that will be of greater value later. Okay. My mom and I, this was before this isn't part of this, but we had this conversation. I think we were playing around looking at her house on Zillow now to see what the value of her home was. But we started having some fun conversations about other places we lived, and we went back and looked at the home that her and my dad owned when I was born. The first home that I moved in from the hospital, went back to this home. And we looked at it, and she was like, we were looking on Zillow, and she was like, man. She was like, we bought that home. I think she said they bought the home for like $40,000. You know, little starter home, and you know now it's worth a lot more.
Right.
So, again, should she have sold that home? Well, now the home that she has is a much nicer home. It's much bigger because our family grew over time. So one, is it even realistic to make it through life and never sell an asset? What do you think?
To me, it's more of, do you need the liquidity? You know, is the market hitting, you know, a point where you thought to yourself, this is my, you know, we talked about exit strategies all the time. Like, is this the point where I'm going to exit and feel good about it? Or do I need the cash flow? Do I need the liquidity, or could I just keep it? Does my burn rate, you know, work out to where it's not going to stretch me so thin that I can't handle having 2 mortgages, even having a renter in it?
Yeah. And I think for me, when I was considering this golden nugget and this particular person's advice, I kind of heard regret somewhat, not like burnt, like permanent regret, but just this like thing where, man, I sold this house back then. If I would have just held it a few more years, I could have sold it for more. So first of all, hindsight's 20/20.
Yep. And I think everybody's felt that.
Secondly, I think it's important, and I tell clients this all the time, anytime we make an investment, we make the investment going into it with an exit strategy, right? And that's what you were just alluding to.
Right.
We did this. We bought into, with a client, we bought into a newer company at a pretty opportune. Now, at the time, I didn't know it was this opportunistic. And this is not like, I'm not trying to toot any horns that this is normal or anything like that. But I told the client, hey, I think when we buy this company, we should hold it until a sell price, until it gets to about here. I think the future of this company has enough growth and enough evidence. Well, when COVID hit, it perpetuated that timeline. It grew fast and furious, and we hit our goal very quick. Okay. So we sold. Now it continued to go higher. And at that point in time, the client was calling and saying, oh man, like hindsight's 20/20, but we should have probably kept that holding. Well, now, yes, we could have made more money had we hold it and hit that timing perfect. But at the same time, now, if you look at that price of that company, it's nowhere near where it was when we sold. And so in that sense, I think it's really important that any investment you make, even growing a business, if you go back and you listen to our real estate podcast, we talk about, a holding time for a home, minimum holding time. Like if you're going to buy a property, you need to plan to live in it for 5 to 7 years, unless it is purely a investment play.
Yep.
But 5 to, I mean, you're going to own the home. Even if you're not living there, you're going to own the home for 5 to 7 years. You need to plan for it. Now, I bought a home and I had an exit strategy. I knew what that purpose of that home was. It was good for my family then. I also knew that that wasn't my forever home. And I had an idea in mind of when I would like to sell that home, for what value, kind of had a time frame in mind. But the real estate market caught on fire, and it gave me an opportunity much quicker that I would otherwise not have had. So exit strategies are important, but one thing I do appreciate about his golden nugget is I think it perpetuates this kind of idea or another golden nugget of be a long-term investor.
Yep.
Right. I think there is a ton of data and evidence to support that being a long-term investor pays off.
Yep.
Not a short-term. That's stressful. There's a lot of risk.
I mean, there's plenty of data out there in the real estate world, in the the stock market investing world. The more your longevity is what makes you win.
And even away from that, like if we want to talk about some things that aren't necessarily efficient markets, so to speak, or investments in the traditional sense, but think about like an antique car, right? You typically don't buy an antique car with the intention to flip it right away, right? Like most of the time you're like, man, I'm gonna hold this and it's gonna appreciate, and I got this really cool thing, or a watch, right? Or some jewelry. So time is an investor's best friend. And that is another golden nugget, but I think that kind of coincides with what this guy was saying. That is true.
Yeah. Talking about, us breaking down the science behind all this stuff. And I mean, you can look at numbers all day in those two categories, and longevity always wins.
I went and captured there's a website, and it's if you're watching, you can see, I'll put it up on the screen, officialdata.org/US/stocks/S-P-500. All right. And in that, I have this, I went back and I said, okay, I was born in 1984. If I would have put in $100 in the S&P 500 and I never sold it, just $100 the day I was born, that $100 would have grown into $5,400. Okay. Now, that's not like an earth-shattering, life-changing amount by any means. However, if I would have known that money was there, and let's say, for example, I was 18 years old and about to go to college, do I leave that money alone and run the risk of not being able to pay for college? Do I finance college via loan and leave this money to sit and grow? Or do I potentially take some or all of this money and pay for college? Now, we know $5,000 isn't paying for an education these days, but go with us here. I think there becomes a lot of choices that are very important to the individual. And that's where I think his golden nugget doesn't necessarily stick. I love the idea of being a long-term investor. I know the feeling of selling something too soon. But at the same time, if I can't afford to finance, or I can't afford college, and I need to sell an appreciating asset for an opportunity to go get a degree that's going to produce a greater income, whatever the case may be, now I have the income to go back later and buy more of that S&P 500 asset, right? I think the ebbs and flows of life kind of will dictate sometimes that we have to sell.
Right.
But again, part of that is I love the idea of focusing on long-term growth. And if we don't have to sell, and I think that's just that part, we drive the part home, don't necessarily do things because the normal way, right? Like in buying, what's the normal life path for the average American family is I'm in my 20s, I graduate college, I get my job.
College, job, married, house.
And then I buy my house. And then the family starts to grow, or the job moves us, and I got to buy the next house. And the next house, I have some equity in my previous house. So I sell that house and I go get a new house that is a little bit nicer, a little bit bigger, more accommodating to a larger family. And we repeat that process until right around retirement time, kids are out of the house. So what do we hear? We're going to downsize, right? In that sense, I think that's the normal way. So if I was just to assume that I'm going to be like everyone else, that is indicative of me selling an appreciating asset. what I do love about his golden nugget is it challenges the norm.
Yep.
And I think that is the piece to hang on to, is maybe it's instead of saying never sell an appreciating asset, maybe the golden nugget is, if I'm going to sell an appreciating asset, it's either A, because I've met my objective and hit my goal, or B, it's because I put a lot of analysis into this and it's the best possible decision for me.
Right.
Because in reality, you know, we've worked with people on like real estate kind of growth and stuff, and you know, it's do I take out a HELOC as a down payment and expand my real estate footprint? Do I save up and pre-fund the down payment and just go through like more traditional lending, or do I sell this potential asset to? So I really think that what his golden nugget is wonderful about is saying, don't just sell because that's the normal way.
Right.
Challenge yourself, challenge your situation, explore every opportunity, because at least like last year, you know, rates were incredibly affordable. So just selling a home when I could potentially just leverage a second mortgage, there could have been some incredible opportunity to generate some serious net worth appreciation. Mm-hmm. So the normal way back then of selling to buy the next bigger thing, maybe we could have figured something out that
right.
would be better for you. On the flip side, now rates are extremely high. And if the opportunity is to sell something to get the next thing that's more, maybe it's a better opportunity, or maybe it's out of necessity. I'm moving across the country for a job. Mm-hmm. I can't afford a second mortgage. Well, then life is kind of dictating that we potentially have to go this route. So, this S&P 500 calculator thing is cool because it is showing, like, you know, if I would just sit and hold, you know, adjusted for inflation, I'm averaging 7.92% of growth. And if that compounds, so then we start talking about the compounding effect of money. Yep. If I'm reinvesting my dividends, and that growth is going to seriously start to skyrocket.
And then if you add in dollar cost averaging, that's a whole nother ball game of the long-term play. You can put that on autopilot.
I'm going to change my date here to pretend that I was 60 years old to show even more of the compounding interest effects. So let's just go back to like 1960. And when we calculate that, I changed the wrong year. We would still have $100. 2022 start year 1960. Calculate that, and all of a sudden now I have, you know, $40,000, just under $40,000, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at that, now all of a sudden, okay, well now I'm 60 years old. I put away $100, never sold my appreciating asset. And that's, I mean, $40,000, supplement some Social Security in there. You got a year's worth of living expenses.
Right.
Right. Like, so that's off of $100.
Yeah.
You could live for a year spending somewhere in the realm of $60,000 potentially, assuming your Social Security is around, you know, $1,500 to $2,000 a month, somewhere in there. So that's pretty exceptional. So there's some validity behind this notion of never selling an appreciating asset. I don't like the word never in any situation. I never like the word never. But to say I should think long and hard, explore every opportunity, and not just do it because it's status quo.
Yep.
Putting that kind of analysis into the decision of selling appreciating assets, having the long-term mentality, that is proven time and time again to be your best path to success. Yep. And I really think that that's the undertone of that golden nugget.
Yep.
What do you think?
100% agree. The longevity usually always wins.
So if you go into an investment strategy, this could be your 401k. This could be, you know, starting a you know, personally managed. It can be whatever. It can be buying a real estate footprint. Like, it can be anything. if you're going to go into this and you have that long-term mentality of, hey, I'm making this investment, I'm going to think of it as a buy and hold strategy, allow time to do its thing. And if I ever think I'm supposed to sell, again, it's either going to be goal-based, like I'm going to sell it because I need to, because I met my goal. It's going to be kind of cash flow dictated, potentially saying like I kind of have to sell it because I have needs to take care of. Or it's going to be something that I put a lot of analysis into. And just because normally people sell their house to buy the next one, as an example, I'm not going to necessarily jump to that conclusion. I'm going to consider all my options, put in the due diligence, work potentially with a financial professional to give me some really candid feedback and analysis, make sure that that analysis isn't motivated by some ulterior kind of thing, right? Like you got to make, like anytime somebody's giving you financial advice, to include us, there always should be the question, okay, like, is this good advice for me and this person? More this person, less this person, or is it just good advice for me? I think it's super huge because I hear advice, to your point, Instagram, like influencers, like all these.
It's nonstop. It's every day.
And it's like, man, that's the way they present it. It's like, that's a great idea. Yeah. But then you realize, oh, the commissions that they're going to generate is definitely padding their pocket.
Yeah.
So even though it sounds like a good idea, is this good for me advice?
Right.
Or is it sound good and actually it's good for them advice? It worked for someone else.
Yeah. I had a client call me last week. You know, she was talking to a couple of friends at a wedding and they were giving her all this, you know, advice and then also the gloom and doom of the market. And she went into full blown panic mode. And it's like, well, did they know your situation? No, they didn't have any idea of their situation. And I was like, well, what is their, like, you know, what was their timeline? Well, they got in last year and got out. I was like, well, what's your timeline? Well, it's, you know, 24 years. And I'm like, that's a big difference.
It's a big difference. Like, and I had a call earlier today, and on the flip side of that, this client had a friend, a newer friend, talk about something that she's doing to generate some passive income. Client called me, and I'm actually really excited for her on this venture because I think I actually really like it.
Right.
And I think not only is it
fits
good,
her.
it's good for her.
Right. It fits
and it's
her goals
part of
and
her
her
goals.
purpose.
Yeah, it's been a goal of hers for a long time. I think this is a great way to enter into the space that she's wanting to enter into. You know, there's still due diligence. This was this morning we had a call.
Yep.
And it'll probably be the better part of several months for her to actually realize this, but we're starting the due diligence. And that's the important part here is don't just be status quo. And to this gentleman's point on his golden nugget, I think he's looking back and saying, I shouldn't have done it just because that's the normal way.
I should have challenged it and done some due diligence to make sure that I was making the right decision instead of just doing the status quo.
And always too, I think it's important, like when you are collecting wealth, like I can think back to some equities that I purchased at different parts of my life early on. I was like, man, I look at these prices now, I'm like, dang it, like should never have sold that. So I think understanding that as long as investments, companies, whatever we're investing in stay healthy, right? You'll probably see long-term appreciation. Can I get out of it and come back later? Potentially. Is there missed cost? Or maybe not, right? Because again, if I had to sell the S&P 500 investment, this $100 investment to pay for college, but instead of making $45,000 a year, I could make $70,000 a year. Now all of a sudden I graduate college, I can put a new $100, go even potentially put $5,000, and now I have $70,000 a year where I could be putting some sizable chunks of money into the market or into any investment. I really think that like I said, the undertone of what he said, there was some regret that I heard because he's living today looking backwards, realizing he could have made more money if he would have just waited a little bit longer, or he'd have this huge net worth potentially, but I think he also was discounting the fact like maybe you wouldn't have this huge net worth because you couldn't have bought this, or you couldn't have done or executed this part of the strategy if you never would have had the capital
or the
from the
liquidity
sell.
to do it. Yeah.
So anyway, I think that, again, going back, should I ever sell an appreciating asset, or I would never sell an appreciating asset. I love the intention and the undertones and what that mentality supports. I can't find the justification to prove that that will fit every person's life, because sometimes, again, we have to realize some capital in order to take advantage of the next opportunity.
Right.
And sometimes we're just in a situation where life says, hey, you got to sell that in order to survive for a little bit.
Yep.
And then sometimes, like I said, it just becomes unreasonable. Like especially on some assets, I had a house in Texas that I just needed to sell because it was just too cumbersome to like try to manage from afar. You know, like having a house in Texas, having renters come in and out, and having that turnover, and paying the right property manager, not having oversight all the time. There's a lot of risk that I didn't feel comfortable with living in Nashville. You know, so that was a choice that I made. Now, if I went and looked at Zillow and looked at that old address and looked at when I sold it and what it was worth now, I'd probably dang, I should.
But again, that goes back to, you know, there's going to be a lot of golden nuggets that we'll go over on the podcast and everything. But bottom line is, you can take the golden nuggets from your neighbor and from your dad and from your grandparents. And if you take it from great grandma, the only reason she did it is because the pot wasn't big enough.
Yeah.
But it carried on because nobody challenged it.
Yep.
You know, the grandmother didn't challenge it. The mother didn't challenge it. The daughter didn't challenge it. And they just kept cutting a third of the ham off.
Exactly. And I think, you know, this notion of challenging the status quo, for this gentleman, I think that's what he kind of has some regret, because probably early on he made some decisions to sell some things just because he thought that's what you were supposed to do. And again, going back to the undertones, and I say regret, like I don't mean that like with negative and like I don't mean that to have negative what's the word I'm looking for? Connotation. What I am suggesting is that there is just this ability to go back and be like, man, I wish I would have not done that. So to that point, hindsight's 2020, but I think we can put more due diligence if we're a long-term, goal-based, cash flow-oriented investor.
We have a purpose.
We have a purpose and intent, and we have, you know, we can know the exit strategy ahead of time. I was just talking to someone yesterday who's building this wildly successful business, and I was just like, hey, you know, the question was brought up in the room, what's your exit strategy? And in that question alone, you could start immediately seeing his wheels spin, because, and that happens all the time. We're talking about assets, businesses or assets. Meet business owners all the time that don't have the exit strategy, right? They just, they're so caught up in the building process. They're going to get down the road later on and realize they kind of cornered themselves into something, or, you know, have to make hard decisions or costly decisions,
or they can't get out, or something.
Yeah. So it's, you know, whether it's a business, whether it's real estate, whether it's a stock or bond, whether it's a whole portfolio, or, you know, a car or whatever, what's the exit strategy? What's the purpose it's going to serve?
Invest with the purpose, have an exit strategy.
And that's huge. And then to his point is, don't sell because emotion or fear dictates it, right? And that's where the long-term thing that you were alluding to, you know, this lady's timeline is 24 years, not 12 months. And so in that sense, right now, times are a bit scary, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to like quit because we're goal-based, because we know time's on our side, and we know that there's this really beautiful process that happens that is compounding money, compounding value, compounding interest. All these things play into effect, that if I just stay the course and let the time work through all the day-to-day stuff that's going on, the hyperinflation, the Federal Reserve, the you know, the politics of our world right now. Like if I just let time solve some of these problems, there's a good chance that I'm going to be better for it. And I'm waiting it out because my goals are more important to me than the geopolitical turmoil of today.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's a little nerve wracking. Yeah. Kind of makes me sick to my stomach to see my account down a little bit. Yes. I'm worried about my house that I just purchased losing value next year if we go into, whatever economic event or recession or whatever the case may be. Yeah, that makes me a little nervous and apprehensive, but my goals matter more. And if I look at the facts, if I look at the science, if I look at the data, there's a ton of stuff. We're looking at a chart. You guys can't see it's on the other wall, of just historical event after historical event after historical event going back to 1930. And it's just like, man, this economy and this market in the United States has survived so much.
Yeah.
Right. And
we've gone through a lot since 2020.
We were just looking at that chart today. It's like, man, like the past 2 years. Ooh. And that comes into it too, right? Like I think you have, when I was in the Army, one of the big focuses were on this like hypervigilance, hyper awareness, causing like a lot of I think one of the catalysts, and I'm by no means like a psychologist here. So you guys could totally disagree if you know more about this, and I'm happy to learn more because it affects me. The notion that back to back deployments, you would come home, but you would never have enough time to really decompress. Mm-hmm. And it just built, right? So like you'd carry that stress for the few months or maybe a year that you were home, you go back on another deployment and the stress adds on, and it just really starts to have this compounding and really it takes its toll.
Right.
But you almost forget, your body has unlearned how to decompress. Mm-hmm. And so it takes a ton of effort. And I'm looking at like what we're going through, from the geopolitics, from the economics, from the markets, from everything that we've been going through. Like, I mean, 2017, 18, those were pretty rough years with the political stuff that was going on. There's still some stress and, heartache and hurt and stuff that's going on that people are still kind of upset about. And that's carrying on. You have COVID and people were scared and people were angry and markets were turbulent and jobs and people couldn't go out. And then it just keeps snowballing. Right. And now we have a Federal Reserve that probably should have started their job in controlling inflation last year, kept using that transitory word and kind of ignoring their job. And now they're having to go extra hard and heavy. Markets aren't liking that. So there's a lot of this buildup of stress, right? And I think we have to make a very intentional effort as people to really, really start to focus on this notion that we have to work to decompress. We have to work to get back into a space where we're not allowing this buildup of stress to stay on our back. And part of that, I think, is, again, going back to the facts, putting our feet on the ground and saying, okay, these are my truths, right? My truth is that I understand compounding interest. I understand time. I understand long-term. I understand my goals. I was about to
say the best way to mitigate the stress and all of that is knowing your purpose and having that long-term, because people our age, we're probably going to see this 5, 6, 7 more times before we retire.
Potentially.
It could happen. But if you have that long-term mentality, you're going to get through it.
Yeah. And so all that said, golden nugget, never sell an appreciating asset. While I can't say that golden nugget is 100% true for everyone from my seat, I see the merit, but I love the message that it promotes: goal-based, cash flow-based, analysis, intentionality, time, long-term, like all these pieces, challenging the status quo. Don't come into an investment decision and do it just only because that's what somebody else told me to do. I'm going to do it because it's right for me right now.
Right.
And then that way, when my $500,000 home that I sold for $500,000 is worth $750 a couple years later. I'm not regretful because I knew I did it when I did it because I needed it and it was the right thing for me to do.
Yep.
All right.
100%.
Anything else?
Nope.
Cool. Hope you guys enjoyed the Golden Nuggets. Please send us anything that you would like us to explore.
Yeah, shoot us some emails of what your neighbors have been telling you.
Yeah, you can always find our contact information at www.harpethwealthpartners.com. You can look us up, call us, email us, whatever you need to do. But we would love your guys' feedback on either nuggets, golden nuggets that you've heard. Maybe you've given advice. If you feel like you've made it, if you feel like you're successful, and you have something that you would go back and tell and you're like, I know this is true, we'll put it up. We'll test it. And again, it's not about telling you you're wrong, but let's find the science so people that can take your advice have some real factual things to stand on. So when times get scary, they're not questioning it because they know it's true and they know that it's good for them.
It's their truth. Yeah.
That's it. Until next time, thanks and talk soon. We hope you learned from our conversation today. It is important to us that you know this is for educational purposes and not intended to be considered specific advice for any individual listener. If something we discussed is relevant to you and you have questions of how it might be applicable to your specific situation, please reach out to your financial professional. Of course, we are happy to have further conversations with you regarding specific questions or applications to your individual financial situation. With that, here are a few disclosures. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Harpeth Wealth Partners are separate entities from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Hypothetical examples presented are not representative of any specific investments. Your results may vary. With that, thank you, and we look forward to having you back. Take care.